Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Askbonbon Show. I am your host, Bonnie Bruder, where we bring you real conversations about what matters most and introduce you to the people and the tools to create a life you love. As an entrepreneur and someone who has been an entrepreneur for pretty much my whole life, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our entrepreneurial series. We have so many incredible guests that have not only started their own business, but have worked for some pretty incredible companies and then made the decision to go out on their own and create some really magnificent results. So today is no exception. I am going to introduce everybody to Julio Viscovich from R Factor. Welcome.
Hi, Bonnie. How you doing? Pleasure to be here.
I am doing fantastic. So many of our viewers are either business owners or they're considering being business owners, and they're hungry for information and tips, not only on, how you did it and how you went on your own, but for a lot of the information that I know you have. So can you tell our viewers just a little bit about your background and your story and some of the companies that you've been involved with?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't an easy journey, and I certainly didn't have a plan. Coming out of university as a 22 or 23-year-old, I faced challenges right off the bat. My first ever role after university was a college professor. So I was younger than 90% of the students that were actually in there. So you can imagine, the hills and the challenges that I had to overcome just to gain the respect that, somebody else might have gotten in that particular situation. So from then on, I really knew that I liked challenges. I took on, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So what I did is I decided to travel. I went out to South Korea. I spent 2 years there learning what a new culture looks like, learning what the other side of the world looks like, learning how to behave around people from, all sorts of different cultures, because I grew up in a very small town in Ontario, Canada. And to be honest, that was the best experience I had, was that travel, that trip to Southeast Asia, because not only was I able to see a different culture, but I also went to some third world countries. I went to Cambodia. I spent some time there, and that was the most humbling experience of my life. I saw people who had no clothes. I saw all sorts of different things, and as much as we have here, I can always think back to that whenever I have a moment where there might be some ego creeping in or something like that. I can always reset myself and think of that particular time period in my life. So that was instrumental, and of course came back to Canada after that and started getting in the training business and side of things as a sales trainer. And ultimately ended up working with a small startup that started here in Vancouver in Canada called Hootsuite. So if anyone hasn't heard of Hootsuite, it's now grown into a company of I think over 1,000 employees. 10 million users. Something like that. So it's quite huge, and to be a part of that, I started with that company when they were about 50 people. I was a part of growing that until 650, 700 people, and at that time, I was faced with a difficult decision. It was, do you continue staying on this ship and building it and working towards this goal with this great company, or is it that time where you've learned enough and I'm, ready to jump out and try something on my own? And there was a few phone calls that I received where, people from large companies said, hey, why don't you do some consulting work for us? And at that time I figured, in the social media space, it's still quite young. There's still best practices being formed. And for me, it was a no-brainer. I thought, I'm going to try something that I can give more than I'm currently giving in my current role, and I can drive this. I can work on my own. I can finally create some freedom for myself. So I left a great company to start things on my own, and I'll tell you, it was not easy. It was challenging, right? I had a huge student loan debt that I was carrying into this role, starting things on my own. I didn't know whether or not I was going to have an awesome meal to eat next week. I didn't know if people were going to pay their bills or their invoices on time. But it was a great learning experience. And, in the middle of this, when I was contemplating, do I continue on? Do I, try something different? I met R Factor. a startup in Charlotte, North Carolina that focuses exactly on my niche, my area of expertise, which is social selling, using social media on top of a sales process or building relationships with customers on social media. So it was a no-brainer. And since then, I've now moved into the Vice President of Marketing role with R Factor, and I am loving life. And as a young executive, I couldn't be happier than the position I'm in, with a great company and with so much learning and life experience under my belt.
That is fabulous. And you and I obviously have so much in common because not only with the training background, and then I come from the learning and development space, but also, and I kind of equate social media these days to that. I started my career in the boom of the internet industry. So when it first came on the scene, going to all these hot companies. And for those viewers who don't know what Hootsuite is, it's a technology, and I'm sure you can expand on this, but it's where you basically can kind of preset your social media. So your Twitter feeds, your tweets, your Facebook feeds, and so forth. And then they can go out at a specific time and day. And the reason that I bring this up is I'm wondering, how challenging was it for you personally to make the decision? I know when I decided to go out on my own and become an entrepreneur, it was very tough to leave these, very popular internet companies. So for you, how challenging or kind of scary was that to decide to go out on your own?
It was super scary, especially when you're working for a company who has a great brand, a safety net, so to speak, something that you could easily make into a long-term cushy gig where, you can ride the brand, you can have all of the fruits of that, to contemplating jumping into a startup or my own business where it was, completely the opposite, where there were obstacles, where there was no safety net there. So that was the craziest part. And for me, I always knew that I enjoyed challenges, and that was the first part, right? And the second part is, I knew that there's certain variables that I could control with myself in my life, and those variables include how hard I work, how many hours I put in a day. Those are all things I could control, and I knew that when I left, if I was going to start my own thing or join whatever company was going to come next, I knew that if I worked harder than everybody else, and I put in more time than everybody else in my area, then nobody was going to take something away from me. And I think that was something that I always remembered, a quote from Mark Cuban, and he said this, which was, work or live every day of your life that just like somebody's working 24 hours a day to take everything you have away from you. And I think that quote was instrumental in driving my success, and always looking back to that and thinking, exactly, when you get tired, when you're up too late, you think of that, and you just get that fire going again.
It's interesting, when you and I first had a conversation, you mentioned that quote, and I thought about that for the rest of the day and into the weekend. I was pondering that, and I thought, gosh, it's such almost like a negative way to look at things. But then when I wrapped my head around it, I thought, no, that truly is how you have to do entrepreneurialism. It's like every single day you're recreating. Every single month you don't know, what's going to come through the door. So it's now become one of my favorite quotes, but it's very, very true. And to hear you say it, in that way was very powerful. So tell us some of the biggest challenges you did have to overcome. When you left this brand, you left this kind of cushy, to use your word, opportunity. What were some of the challenges that you personally faced as an entrepreneur that got you to where you are today?
Well, I think I touched on it a little bit, but the biggest thing was not knowing, the uncertainty of what was coming tomorrow, who was going to pay their bills, whether anybody was going to pay their bills on time, just not knowing. So the uncertainty was the biggest thing, right? And I think if I could look back on it, and I think clearly can look back on it now and say if I did it all over again, I would make sure that somebody who's moving into entrepreneurial life, make sure that you have enough business drummed up already before you jump into it, right? And I think these days, it's actually never been easier, I guess, per se, to do that, because now folks are becoming intrapreneurs. And I don't know if, that's a term that's everybody's heard, but that's a term that I use, daily. And that's the ability for somebody to practice entrepreneurial traits and qualities while they're at work or while they're at, doing business for somebody else under a corporate brand. So, you look at companies like Google, and they're putting in these sort of test areas or laboratories where they're trying new things. They're encouraging employees to do things that they're not currently doing in their regular job role. They're trying to increase or encourage innovation. And I think if organizations are forward thinking, they should provide that. And as a person, we should take advantage of that and try and champion a program at work, or try and get a group going, or do something that's extracurricular at the office and practice taking a little bit of leadership or trying new things within your organization and get some practice in. And when you leave and become an entrepreneur, if that's what you want to do, then you've already gotten some of that under your belt. So there's ways to get practice and reps in without actually having to leave and fall flat on your face.
Oh, that's great advice. That's one of my favorite initiatives that they do have at Google. The employees are responsible for spending a certain amount of hours per month working on something that's completely unrelated to their job. And interestingly, that's kind of how this show, came about, is that back in the day, many, many, many years ago, I would, still doing coaching, still doing the speaking and training, but then I would do internet TV shows, and I would find I would spend hours and hours and hours editing them and putting in, lower thirds and things like that. And then I just thought, wow, this is really something I'm passionate about. Maybe I should pursue this. So it's great to hear from a business philosophy that you also subscribe to that and that you're bringing that into your ventures and your companies.
Mm-hmm. I think, passion's such a key thing, right? I mean, if you're going to do something and you're going to do it full bore and do it, 24 hours a day hard, you better make sure that you're passionate about it. Otherwise, you're going to get tired quickly, and whatever you're doing is going to get old quickly, and it's not sustainable.
Great. So what's next for you? What is your big vision or your big goal that you're working towards now?
What's next for me is continuing on the path that I'm, currently on. I've just joined R Factor a little while ago. I'm still building, what we want to do over there. Our vision is to change the world and the way people share content online, how people share digital content on social media. And that's my goal. That's my passion. I'm a teacher in my spare time. I'm an adjunct professor where I teach digital marketing. So I'm passionate about that. I love social. I love helping kids leave university, or I guess adults leave university, and really have a stranglehold on what they need to do to be employable, to have social media skills. And I like doing that for everybody. Whether that's an organization who's trying to drive more revenue, I want to help organizations use social media the right way and build human-to-human engagements and interactions through social media, and that's what I want to do. I want to be that leader in the space that helps organizations adopt it properly and activate their employees to use it, because people who are the mouths of the brand have far more impact than the brand itself, and that's the reality of today, is people trust content and messaging that comes from real people, not from corporate branding. So that's what I really want to drive home, and I want to help organizations adopt that and be on the forefront of innovation.
Fantastic. Well, I have no doubt that you will be very successful at that. So thank you so much for being here, Julio, and for sharing your story and for being a courageous entrepreneur.
My pleasure, Bonnie. Thank you for having me, and thank you tons for having me on the show. I love it.
Absolutely. We will be right back with another incredible entrepreneurial story.